Okay, so it's now 10 a.m. So I think we can get going. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this IAM Road Smart Policy webinar. Young and old behind the wheel, understanding risk at both ends of the age spectrum. I know we have many experts and road safety professionals in attendance, and we're also delighted to have many IAM Road Smart local group chairs also joining. Before we kick off, I'd like to say we have a few good housekeeping rules. We do have quite a lot of people on the call, and more people will continue to join. So I'd like to ensure that our speakers have all the bandwidth. So if we could turn off our cameras and microphones while the speakers are presenting, this will hopefully reduce the chances of any technological hitches. Famous last words. During our Q&A sessions, we will enable microphones and cameras. Just raise your hand towards the end of the session just to let me know that you want to ask a question, and I'm sure you're called upon. We'll come to questions from the audience during the Q&As on a first come, first served basis. And finally, just to let you know, we are recording the session, which will be made publicly available at a later date. So just know you are being recorded, unfortunately. And just a little bit of an intro for those of you who aren't familiar with myself. I'm Will Porter, Policy, Public Affairs and Communications Manager at IAM RoadSmart. I'm joined today by our Policy and Standards Director, Nick. Nick, can you give us a wave? There's Nick. So for those unfamiliar with what we do, IAM RoadSmart is a national road safety charity which focuses primarily on improving driving and rider standards. But we also campaign for safer roads, and we are supporters of the Vision Zero approach. That's the ambition to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Although a national charity, our work can happen without our network of 160 local groups and 5,000 volunteers who guide thousands of people through our courses each year. We also work with ADIs to provide courses aimed at younger and older drivers, and we're a provider of drink drive awareness courses. This webinar comes at a very important time. 2 months on from the government's publication of their road safety strategy, we're beginning to understand what some of these proposed measures could mean in practice and how they may impact drivers, particularly older and younger driver. So with an aging population, ensuring that people can drive safely for longer is becoming an increasingly important policy challenge. And there's also a growing focus on areas such as fitness to drive, eyesight, and how we support older drivers to remain safe and mobile for as long as possible. And there's consultations on many of these proposals still open. So that's why I'm thrilled to announce our 3 keynote speakers today. Our first speaker, Dr. Carol Hawley, will be speaking about research into older drivers, including fitness to drive and eyesight considerations. After Carol, we'll be joined by Rob Hurd, MBE, who will bring a policing and practical road safety perspective, focusing on how older drivers can stay safe behind the wheel for longer. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. David Grundle, who will explore how we train our young drivers. So during the Q&As and the panel discussion, please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions to our speakers, though we do politely ask that this is done once the speaker has finished. We'll fit in as many questions as we can. We'll also be running some interactive polls halfway through the session. I'll put them in the chat box, so if you'd like to participate and answer them, that'd be great. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carol Hawley. Carol is an academic research psychologist with over 30 years' experience working in the fields of driving and road safety research, both in the UK and internationally. She chairs the Special Interest Group on Driving as part of the World Federation for Neurological Rehabilitation and is a member of the Older Drivers Task Force, where she chairs its working group on older driver eyesight. Carol also has extensive research experience in areas including fitness to drive and the attitudes and behaviours of older drivers. And Carol also founded the Cargi Research Consultancy, which specialises in driving-related research. Carol, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you very much for inviting me. Now I'm going to try to share my screen, so bear with me on this. It's lovely to see so many of you here as well. Right, I'm going to go for it. Hopefully you can see my screen.
All good.
Good. Right, so as Will said, I'm going to be talking about the role of vision and health in driving, and was asked to look at the difference between older and younger drivers, so I've called it Age Matters. So the outline of what I'm going to say this morning are talk about health conditions and fitness to drive, visual standards for driving and driver licensing, then a quick look at common eye conditions which can impair fitness to drive, and then looking at road collisions and casualties linked to vision and health. And then DVLA licence revocations for visual and medical impairment, a very quick look at police eyesight campaigns into vision, and the inquest into 4 pedestrian fatalities caused by visually impaired drivers, which has really sort of been a bit of a sort of something that's fed into the new road safety strategy and has really changed things. And then to some conclusions. So, unfit drivers, health and vision. There's a list of 6 groups of drivers that the DVLA worry about. And this list was given to me way back when I first started working with the Department of Transport and DVLA, and said, actually, these 6 groups are the ones we're most worried about. These can affect any age, but the older they are, the greater the risk. So there's a group that can't see correctly. So those with visual impairment can infect younger and older drivers, but more so in the older group. Those that can't think correctly. So that includes cognitive impairment, for example, dementia and other neurological conditions, again, affecting more the older group. There's those that can't physically operate a vehicle. So that could be physical disability or frailty due to an older age. And then the risky group are those at risk of sudden incapacity. So those with seizures, hypoglycemia for diabetics, cardiac arrhythmias, and some of the sleep-related issues such as sleep apnea. And then there's those with mental incapacity, such as psychiatric disorders, and then the group impaired by alcohol, drugs, or medication, which can cover all ages. So I'm focusing mostly today on vision because that's where my research has been over the last 10 years mostly. So visual standards for driving, the DVLA minimum standards for vision include both visual acuity, clarity and sharpness, and visual fields, which includes peripheral vision. But to obtain a full driving licence, as we know, drivers are only tested for visual acuity as measured by the number plate test carried out before the on-road driving test, where they read a vehicle number plate at a distance of 20 metres with or without corrective lenses. A driver can then hold a licence until the age of 70, which, if they started at 17, could be up to 53 years, when there's no required check that they meet the visual standards again. During this time, of course, a variety of eye diseases could develop, some of which are gradual, so they might not notice. And unless they've been advised by a health professional or optician, the driver may be unaware if they meet or continue to meet the legal standards for driving. And then at age 70, drivers may renew their licence by completing a form to self-declare that the vision meets visual standards. But unless they've declared an eye condition to DVLA, there's no requirement to have an eyesight test. So it's very dependent on the driver themselves. So common eye conditions. The prevalence of eyesight conditions generally increases with age, and visual impairment is common in the older population, and the risk continues to increase as people age. The most common ones are age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. That affects the macula, leading to a loss of central vision, making activities like driving difficult. It affects 3.1% of the population aged over 50. Cataracts, obviously seen as an older person's condition, causes the eye's lens to become cloudy, leading to a gradual decline in vision and increased sensitivity to glare from sunshine or headlights, an increasing problem with today's LED headlights. And the prevalence in the 50 to 99 age group is 54.4%. So more than half of those over 50 are likely to have some form of cataract. Glaucoma is characterised by increased pressure in the eye, which can damage the optic nerve and lead to loss of peripheral vision. Affects 2% of those aged over 40, but nearly 10% of those aged over 80. And then there's diabetic retinopathy, caused by damage to the blood vessels in the retina, leading to severe visual impairment and blindness if not correctly managed. And about 30% of diabetics have diabetic retinopathy, and that's equivalent to about 1.38 million people. And all those figures have come from the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. So I thought I'd show these slides. I mean, these are images from the College of Optometrists, but it shows quite nicely what someone with glaucoma or cataract would see compared to someone with normal vision. So the top 2 images, on the left, someone with glaucoma, and then the same scene, someone with clear vision. On the right-hand side, you can clearly see a post box in red. You can see a group of pedestrians waiting on the curb. You can see a cyclist waiting there. But if you look at what the person with glaucoma sees, there's no post box. you can't see those people waiting on the curb. You can't see that cyclist. But in the middle, it's quite clear. So that's why glaucoma is particularly dangerous. And then at the bottom, it's a cataract on the left and clear vision of the same scene on the right. So look at the scene on the right, you've got a motorcyclist coming with a headlight on. But on the left, the person with cataracts just sees a glare of that headlight. They also don't see the pedestrians clustered on the curb because everything is blurry and the contrast has just gone. So I thought it was quite an illustration of what these eyesight conditions can be like for drivers. And the thing is, if you've got these conditions, that's your norm. So you don't realise what you're not seeing. So we've carried out studies of road collision data, which has been collected for Stats 19, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is where visional health was a contributory factor. Stats 19 allows police to report all personal injury collisions occurring on public roads to the Department of Transport. It doesn't collect information about damage-only collisions, and personal injuries are categorised as killed, serious or slight. If police attend a collision, they may record factors that have contributed to the collision, in their opinion, and can use up to 6 contributory factors. They're largely subjective, reflecting the opinion of the reporting officer, so they only offer an approximation of the cause of the collision. These contributory factors have now been replaced by road safety factors, and the old CFs have been mapped onto the road safety factors, so we can use long-term data sets. So studies by the College of Optometrists, University of Warwick and Agilicis, we carried out 2, examined associations between health and visual impairment and road casualties amongst older and younger drivers. The cutoff for older and younger was 60, and we chose that because that's the age when eye tests are free. And also it's when optometrists say that recommend that you have an eye test, particularly every 2 years from 60 onwards, if not before. So that study in 2021 analysed nearly 2 million police reported injury collisions recorded on Stats 19, 14 years of data between 2006 and 2018. We extracted data for contributory factors related to vision and health. So one of the factors is called uncorrected defective eyesight, and that's a proxy for vision. And one is illness or disability, mental or physical, a proxy for health. We also looked at dazzling sun, dazzling headlights, and associations between vision and health and collisions at junctions. It's worth defining these contributory factors. So the contributory factor was 504, it's now road safety factor D4. Uncorrected defective eyesight. So the driver or rider's poor vision helped bring about the collision. Includes driver or rider not wearing glasses when they should or wearing the wrong glasses. Drivers are responsible for wearing the correct spectacles they need for driving. And then the health one, CF505, is now road safety factor D5, includes driver, rider, pedestrian either suddenly overcome by illness, for example, fit or blackout, generally affected by illness, affected by illness rather than overcome, for cold or flu, suffering from a permanent disability which contributed to the accident, includes when a driver sneezing or coughing contributes to the collision, and also includes drivers or riders suffering from poor mental health, for example, depression or dementia. So it's a hugely broad category for health, from a sneeze to dementia. Interesting how the police actually interpret this. Rob might be able to tell us. So this slide here are actual numbers. And you can see from the top, so over those 14 years of data, for vision, that contributory factor was only used 2,700 times in 14 years. So police are not using that very often. The health one, nearly 25,000 allocations of that were used during that same period. The age groups are along the bottom, and because it's actual numbers, it looks for health, which are the red bars. All age groups are getting these health contributory factors when they had a collision. The blue bars are vision, less likely in the younger age groups, but there are some, and then it creeps up in the older age groups. I'm showing it again now by percentage of all drivers allocated to contributory factor. And then you've got a much neater pattern. So the red again is health and the blue is vision. Again, the vision is clearly in those older people. Now, is that because the police officer are more likely to think that vision is an issue in older drivers, or is it actually the case? And health again creeps right up. So if you're in your 80s and 90s, about 10 to 14% of those people who were involved in an accident were allocated health as a contributory factor. Quick look at dazzling headlights. Dazzling headlights in those 14 years only allocated over 4,000 times. I think that might be different now with the new headlights, which are so bright. Dazzling sun, more so, allocated 35,000 times during the 14 years. And again, it shows progression through the age groups. It's the older drivers that have been more dazzled. Again, prevalence of cataracts may be an issue here. We had a quick look at junctions from younger and older drivers receiving these contributory factors. The orange bars here are drivers over the age of 60, and the blue bars are those aged under 60. And you can see it's older drivers are certainly more likely to be allocated the contributory factor for either their vision or their health at those junctions. T-junctions and roundabouts on the right-hand side for health, about 5% of drivers over 60, if they had a collision at a junction, they also had a contributory factor saying that their health was impaired. Lots of stats, I'm afraid. You come to the end of the stats, do. These are different ones. These are from the Department of Transport road safety statistics. These are road casualties where vision or health was a contributory factor. The graph on the left is for eyesight and the graph on the right is for health. You'll notice that the scale is very different because there were fewer instances of vision. So that only goes up to 100. These are actual figures again, and the others go for health, goes up to 1,000. So the red bars are fatalities and the blue bars are seriously injured. Now for vision, during those 10 years, there were 758 people who were killed or seriously injured and allocated that vision was a contributory factor, and that included 63 fatalities. For health, there were actually 8,643 people killed or seriously injured, including over 1,000 fatalities, where health was a contributory factor. Now that is really quite worrying. And because we know how contributory factors are allocated, this has got to be an underestimate of what's really happening out there on the roads. And again, Rob will probably be able to explain this more clearly. So over the years, looking at the left-hand bar, the vision, not a lot of change actually. In 2014, 87 people were seriously injured where vision was a factor. And in 2023, 86 were injured and vision was a factor. Little drop in the COVID years there, 2021. And then on the right-hand side, the illness and disability started off pretty high in 2014. 894 people were seriously injured where health was deemed to be a factor. And that has come down a little bit, but it's still well over 700 people being killed or seriously injured where health is a factor. I looked at the people who were being killed and injured, and actually it's mostly vulnerable road users. So over half were vulnerable road users and 45% were vehicle occupants, obviously. The vulnerable road users are not so protected. And of those killed, 2/3 were vulnerable road users and half of the fatalities were pedestrians. And then you just wonder how many of those could have been prevented by eyesight testing, better health testing, and the better licensing rules. So I asked the DVLA via Freedom of Information for the number of driving licence revocations they'd made for not meeting the minimum visual standards for driving, including those triggered by self-declarations, police D751E, so that's also known as Cassie's law, or medical notifications, and asked for it by gender and age group and year. They were unable to break down the type of notification. I really wanted to know how many were self-declarations, how many were medical, but the DVLA database doesn't allow for that. But over the 11-year period, Group 1 driving licence holders, DVLA revoked the licences of nearly 46,000 drivers for not meeting minimum vigilance standards for driving, an average of over 4,000 a year. So that's encouraging. They're finding some people, but are they finding all of them? Little graph here just shows the age group. These are the ones who've had their licenses revoked for visual impairment. And is it a coincidence? So about age 70, when you self-certify your fitness to drive and you fill in that form to renew your license, around that time is the peak where licenses are being revoked. So Some drivers are clearly doing what they should. They're clearly sort of following the rules and saying, actually, no, my eyesight doesn't meet the standards. And even with specialist glasses, I still can't meet the standard. And the license has been revoked. But because we can't dig into the data, we don't have the detail. And you wonder how many of those under 70 are not informing DVLA about their health and their vision. So try and find another way of looking at this. So how many drivers on the road failed to meet the visual standards? Now I looked at 2024 because this is matches the data I'm going to present on the eyesight campaign. There were 42.4 million people holding a full driving license, aged between 16 and 110. But I think most interestingly, 78% of the British population of driving age holds a full driving license. It's quite staggering how many of us hold a driving license. And eyesight campaigns are being carried out annually, whereby police forces in England, Scotland and Wales are asked to undertake a roadside 20-metre number plate test. There's a picture of that happening at the roadside there, with drivers over a 2-week period when the clocks go back in autumn. We've done this now in over 3 years. So known as the police Operation Dark Night campaigns, collaboration with the National Police Chief Councils, the National Police Roads Policing Operations, iHealth UK, Older Drivers Forum, myself, the University of Warwick. So sight tests are carried out either specifically for the campaign or when a driver is suspected as having defective vision or after committing a traffic offence or following a road collision. In 2023, 23 police forces participated. 898 drivers were tested and 20 failed. Doesn't sound a lot, but that's 2.2%. In 2024, 27 forces took part. Over 3,000 drivers were tested, 50 failed, and that's 1.7%. Last year we did it again. 32 forces participated, and we had 3,788 drivers tested. I won't present this because we're still analysing the data, but that will be presented fairly soon. So the 2024 campaign, of those over 3,000 tested, the majority passed, which was good. 1.7% failed, which extrapolated to those 42.4 million full driving licence holders, that means over 720,000 drivers would fail the 20-metre number plate test, which is worrying as you drive along. The failure rate was highest amongst the 81 to 90-year-olds at over 10%, and the lowest in the 25 to 40-year-olds at 0.4%. And most failed drivers had their licence revoked at the roadside using the Cassie's Law procedure, whereby police officers can contact DVLA for an immediate revocation. Just a quick look at the percentage of drivers in each age group. So only 1% of the under 25s fail the test. It gradually creeps up 60, 70, and then shoots up in the 80s. So 81 to 90, say over 10% failed. Over 90, not so many, 5.9. And why were they stopped? So the failures here, so 10% of the failures were detected when the police officer had a suspicion of defective eyesight. But nearly a third were detected after a traffic offence had been committed. So these people who couldn't see the road properly had committed a traffic offence. And even more worrying, 18% had actually been involved in a road traffic collision, and their eyesight did not meet the standards. And nearly 40% was the Operation Dark Night, a voluntary test where they just flag people down and test them at the roadside if they can read the number plate test. So this gives us an interesting snapshot of what's going on the roads. And over the 3 years, it's looking quite consistent to what we're finding. The police officers also asked the driver whether they'd had an eyesight test within the last 2 years. About 60% had had a test, but 40% had not. And again, that's different by age groups. So the younger drivers, the age 17 to 24s, the 25 to 40s, just over 50% had not had an eyesight test within the last 2 years. They don't feel they need to. And then it creeps up. So once I think the free eyesight tests were made for 60, that's probably kicking in here. So older drivers are far more likely to be having their regular eyesight testing. But when you think, so 40% of all those license holders might not have had an eyesight test in the last 2 years. That's almost 17 million drivers who might not have had one, and particularly in those younger age groups. And some of them, not all of them, might not meet the visual standards for driving. Police officers also asked if the driver was prescribed corrective lenses for driving, and a third said they had. Older drivers, again, as you might expect, significantly more likely to be prescribed corrective lenses than the younger ones. Of those prescribed them, most were wearing them, but worryingly, 52 people, 2.2%, were not wearing them. Or they were wearing the wrong glasses. Or they got them in the car and were not wearing them. In some cases, when they failed, the police officer was able to let them get their correct glasses on, do the eyesight test again and pass. And they didn't lose their license if they had them in the car, but it depended on the police officer. And in one case, the wife had to go home and get the right glasses and bring them back, and then the driver passed. But it just shows the importance of wearing those glasses. If you prescribe them for driving, why don't you wear them? College optometrists have actually studied this. They estimate that while the 60% of UK drivers have been advised to wear glasses while driving, but they found that almost a quarter said they do not always wear them for driving. I mean, as we all know, if you go out down the road to the shops, you're still driving, you should be wearing your glasses, not just any time you feel like it. So now coming on to the inquest, which I think has made a big impact, a lot of big media campaign here. Cause of death, it was broadcast in May 25, shortly after the inquest. The Channel 5 team were there at the inquest. And it's titled, Dr. James Agley, the coroner, investigates the deaths of 4 pedestrians in mysterious road collisions. Well, actually, they're not that mysterious when you look at it. So the inquest is into the deaths of Peter Westwell, Marie Cunningham, Grace Folds, and Anne Ferguson. And the inquest in April last year. All 4 were pedestrians killed by drivers who had been told their severe visual impairment did not meet legal standards for driving. And as a witness there, I was shown all the video footage from dash cams and CCTV, and it was clear that none of those drivers braked before they hit those pedestrians, because they didn't see them. Peter was killed by a driver aged 80 whose vision was so poor he could only read a number plate at 2.5 metres. And yet he'd renewed his driving licence 4 times since the age of 70 by ticking the box on the form at licence renewal saying he could read a number plate at 20 metres. Marie and Grace were killed by a driver aged 65 with severe bilateral keratoconus who had been repeatedly told his vision did not meet legal driving standards, even with specialist contact lenses. That was a particularly tragic case. He killed these 2 ladies who just got off a bus and were crossing the road with their shopping trolleys. And he didn't even know he killed 2 people. He ran over them both. He ran over the first lady and then reversed back over the second lady because he didn't know she was there. It was just staggering, really, and the most horrendous thing to see. So Anne was killed by a driver aged 72 with bilateral cataracts so bad that he could not read any of the letters on the Snellen chart, which is those letters that you read at the opticians. He could only count the number of fingers held up. But he told optical professionals he didn't drive, so they did not advise him not to drive because he said he didn't. I mean, these are terrible examples. So the coroner decided to group these cases together as the 4 fatalities share the same feature, that the driver's eyesight was well below the standard required to drive a car when each driver had obtained or renewed their driving licence, the DVLA. And the DVLA had to give evidence for a day where he was quizzing them really on the licensing and how this has happened. And it was also demonstrate the flaws in the driver licensing system, where it is possible to obtain and renew a driving licence without any checks that the information provided by the applicant is true. So it is based on trust. It's based on assuming that the driver is honest. Most are, but some are not, with really tragic consequences. So the current licensing system does not adequately protect the lives of other road users. So from the evidence, other road users, particularly vulnerable road users, are at risk, pedestrians in particular. from drivers with defective eyesight. And the cases considered at the inquest showed that the current system's self-declaration does not adequately protect the lives of others, and it's open to the abuse of a minority of drivers who might ignore advice not to drive, who don't understand the rules. The person who killed Peter Westwell, the one that renewed his driving licence 4 times, claimed that, under oath at the inquest, that he didn't think the question about eyesight on that declaration form applied to him. How he came to that conclusion, no one knows, but it does make you think, are those forms really adequate to capture people who are unfit to drive? It's also open to those who just don't declare an eyesight defect, that they don't meet visual standards, and just continue to drive with impaired vision. So the coroner highlighted how eyesight issues were commonly overlooked when accidents are investigated, and the system's self-reporting makes it likely that visual issues contribute to far more accidents and deaths than are currently reflected in government statistics. And as I said, the contributory factor of vision was only used under 3,000 times in 14 years. So it's not used that often. So it's not getting into the stats. He concluded that the self-reporting, self-referral process was an ineffective, unsafe system, unfit to meet the needs of society, and agreeing with evidence presented at the inquest that the longer we leave it, the more deaths will occur on the roads. He issued a Prevention of Future Deaths notice to the Secretary of State for Transport. And we thought they'd go the same way of all the other Prevention of Future Deaths notices that other coroners have issued, but it hasn't. And now the new road safety strategy takes account of the issues raised, including mandatory eyesight testing for drivers aged 70 and over, and it's under consultation. And I think that's very much thanks to the coroner having done this. Ideally, we'd like people to be tested every 10 years when they renew their licence, and others agree. So I did a study with IAM. Back in 2021, we surveyed over 3,000 drivers aged 60 and over, asked them lots of questions, and back then they were saying that 87% agree that all drivers should have to pass an eyesight test every 10 years. So the blue bar there are the under 70s, and the red bars are the over 70s. So those over 70s even more keen that all drivers should pass. And there's been other surveys since consistently showing about 85 to 95% of respondents agree that mandatory eyesight testing should take place. So conclusions: road casualty statistics show that poor vision and health do contribute to fatalities and serious injuries to other road users. Older drivers, unfortunately, are more likely than younger drivers to be involved in injury collisions where an inadequate vision or health is a contributing factor. Police campaigns suggest about 2% of drivers, over 800,000, would fail a roadside eyesight test. The rates increasing to over 10% for older drivers aged over 70. And that there is willingness amongst both the public and optometrists to move towards mandatory eyesight testing, as used in many other countries. Most of the European countries have some form of testing, and around the world, Australia, Canada, America, they all use some sort of mandatory testing. And the issue of driving and eyesight is now firmly on the government agenda. And following the consultation period, we wait to see what will change and when. And that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was a very insightful, if you'll pardon the terrible pun, presentation.
Stop showering.
Thank you. So now we're going to open up to some questions to the audience. So if you want to ask a question to Carol, can I ask you raise your hand? There's a little raise button there. Or alternatively, if you prefer, you can use the chat box and I'll be able to ask Carol your question. So got a question from Paul. Paul, would you like to ask Carol? I'll just unmute. There you go.
Just a couple of observations. It says every 10 years for an eyesight test. Maybe it would be better to say every license renewal, because older drivers get their license renewal more regularly.
Yeah,
so that would be 3 years.
Yeah, that was I suppose that's slightly misleading, because we asked in our survey, would you agree for all drivers to have a sight test every 10 years? But actually, that's not what the government consultation is talking about. They are talking about renewal at 70, and then possibly 3 years later. At the moment, they recommend an eyesight test every 2 years in the information they put on the renewal notice. But licensing renewal for an older driver, most older drivers over 70, is every 3 years. So that's what the consultation is asking. How frequently should that period be between eyesight tests?
Aligning the two would make it more effective. So that was one of the first points. And the other thing is we're focusing here on the physical eyesight, whether there should be encouragement that hazard perception tests, as we do for young drivers, would also be a good idea for older drivers, because motorcyclists know of the SMIDSing. Sorry, mate, I didn't see you. Seen but not recognised, and hazard perception test. Sorry, hazard perception should assist in that.
Yes, I mean, obviously that would be very good. It's not going to be it's not in the road safety strategy, and probably is a step too far for the Department of Transport at the moment. But yes, hazard perception is good. It's something we work on with Rob Hurd. I think he might be mentioning this in his talk, where we're looking at sort of mature driver assessments, and we've been looking at hazard perception in there as well. And we've done focus groups with older drivers who would really like some sort of hazard perception training, because they're aware that it's perhaps not as good as it was.
Mm.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I've got a few more hands up, and we've got a question in the chat, which I'll just come to before I move on. Helen asks, how do you regulate the outcome of the eye test, e.g. you can't force people to wear glasses? Would the eye test be sent to the DVLA?
If it works as the consultation is hoping it will, mandatory eyesight testing, it would ideally would go directly to DVLA, because that's another thing they're asking in the consultation document. Who should be responsible for passing the information on the result of the eyesight test to DVLA? It's again, they haven't quite worked out the finer details yet, but think it's a good idea.
Perfect, great. And Les, you've got your hand up if you'd like to unmute and ask Carol a question.
Thank you. I'm 71, so I'm definitely in this category, and I am advanced driver and rider. I think everything you put forward, Carol, is absolutely compelling, and it's good that it's in the government consultation, and it looks like they'll take action. That tick, tick, tick. I just had one query about one of the stats you quoted a couple of times, which was those police roadside checks suggest that 2% of I'll say drivers, I don't mean it's drivers or bikers, I don't know, 2% of drivers would fail, and you equate that to something like 750,000 or some number like that. I think that's a flawed statistic, because it's a pre-selection of those who've had an accident or an incident, or the police already think they've got poor eyesight. There was, as I recall your stats, it was just under 50% were randomly selected, and just over 50% there was some pre-selection process that meant these are higher risk people even before they'd been tested. So I just think that using that 2% across all of that is wrong, unless 2% is also the same figure for the slightly under 50% who were selected randomly.
And I see what you're saying, and absolutely right. It's come down. Yes, the first one, there weren't so many people tested, and they were mainly sort of those, as you say, had committed a traffic offence or been involved in a collision, and that was the 2.2%. And then the second year in 2024, there were more random tests, and then the rate came down to 1.7. So you're right, that 2%, it might be a little bit lower as we're getting more. And the 2025 campaign, we've had more people randomly tested. So again, but it's looking fairly consistent. So I think you're right, using that 2% with caution, but we're consistently showing at least sort of like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7% are failing.
Okay, thank you. And it still adds up to a very large number.
It's still a lot. It's still too many people. Yeah.
Yeah. I've just urged, don't overplay that one in case you're slightly overstating, because it's still, if you stated it accurately, it's still a big number.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Les. Helen.
Hi, yeah, really interesting talk, thank you. A couple of points I've just picked up. Really interesting to see your pictures about the cataracts, but from personal experience, I had a cataract, which shocked me at the age of 50, but I had a fast growing one in one eye that I hadn't realised until I actually rubbed my eyes and then had a blurry vision. So mine activated over a year, very fast acting. So not everybody has gradual cataracts that grow over years and years and years. And in both eyes, I've got one growing in the other eye, but it has no effect on my driving. When I had my test done, I said, "Can I drive?" And they said, "Well, your good eye is doing the work of the one with a cataract." So I get where you're saying a lot of people have a gradual one, but there are these very fast ones that some people don't even know they have at all. And I do have
Yes.
regular eye tests.
I know it's cataracts are quite tricky, aren't they? Because I knew a lady who's recently, everyone I've spoken to who's had their cataracts done are amazed at how clear it is. So I think there's a certain amount of it is gradual. I don't know how bad it is until I've had it done,
Yeah.
and wow, I can really see.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
it is a very broad issue. I mean, I've got start cataracts as well, but I'm passing all these tests sort of thing. It's fine. It's there, fortunately,
Yes.
slow growing.
Yes.
So yeah, I know where you're coming from. It's a tricky thing, but yes, we're just something to be very aware of, and the importance of going for those eyesight tests and having a
Yes.
professional check them and let you know if you're fit to
Yeah.
drive.
And just briefly, one other comment. You said 78% of people hold a driving license. My comment or my ask to you would be, of those 78 though, how many actually drive? My mother-in-law has a license just because she needs it for ID. So
Yeah.
that was where that 78% may hold a license, but do that 78% actually drive?
Yeah, we're
So
well
that was
aware
just
of that. Yeah. The IAM survey picked that up because we looked at both current drivers and what they call themselves the ex-drivers no longer driving. And I think at least a third of those who were ex-driving were still had a full driving license.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes,
Thank you.
it's a useful ID. It's a useful thing to have. It's also a bit of
Yeah.
a badge of honor for some as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. We've got time for just one more question, and then we'll get on to our next speaker. So, Colin.
Good morning and thank you. I'm 74, advanced driver and rider. Thinking about the renewal form from age 70 onwards, etc. Do you think it's technically possible to, for example, embed a little if like vision test in the form itself? I'm thinking, for example, of those capture little devices which sometimes you're required to figure out what the symbols sort of mean when you fill in forms online.
Interesting concept. But it's you're trying to do the consultation document and put that in as a suggestion. It might be a step too far for DVLA, but interesting concept, can you? But you can test yourself as well, couldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. But obviously, we're sort of saying that there are some people who will just say yes, I've either had a vision test or my vision is okay, without actually needing to demonstrate that on the form or within that sort of process.
Yeah, I think the way they want to go is actually have an example of the results of an eyesight test carried out by an optometrist. That would be the gold standard.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Carol, for such an informative presentation and for taking the time to answer some questions. Just to let everybody know, you can see in the notes there's the agenda. So Carol is fortunately staying for the panel Q&A session. So if you didn't get the chance to ask Carol a question, you will have another opportunity at the end. Thank you again, Carol.
Thank you.
And on to our next presentation. Our next speaker is Rob Hurd, MBE. Rob is a former roads policing officer with 30 years of experience, during which time he was an advanced police driver and motorcyclist. He also led the Hampshire and Thames Valley Forces VIP escort team. More recently, Rob was awarded an MBE in 2025 for his work campaigning to make roads safer and prevent collisions. He founded the Older Drivers Forum. He sits on the National Older Drivers Task Force and advises government and the Department for Transport on ageing and driving. He is also Road Safety GB's expert on older drivers. Rob, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And it's always lovely to follow Carol because such a knowledge and a font of knowledge that Carol has. And I work very closely with Carol in many projects that we're doing. And some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about actually involves Carol as well because of her font of expertise in that particular field. So let me try and share my screen with you, see if it works. I'm hoping, can you all see that okay?
That's good.
Yep. Fantastic. So just a little bit about myself. As you said, I was in the police for 30 years and really I did set up the older drivers forum whilst I was in the police. And so why am I a consultant in older drivers is why many people think, why aren't you looking at younger drivers? Well, in the police, we did a lot of work with younger drivers, and there's lots of work going on that, which we as the Older Drivers Forum are very much supportive of. And in fact, we totally agree of the idea of graduated driving licenses for younger drivers and maybe looking at a similar thing for older drivers in the future. But let's focus on older drivers at the moment. So whilst I was in the police, I was a senior investigating officer, which meant if there was a fatality or potential fatality, I would get called out to the scene to manage the scene and the subsequent investigations. And unfortunately, I attended over 300 fatalities and I was a senior investigating officer for over 100. Now, quite a few of those involved attending multiple Crown Courts, inquests, giving evidence in those. I also, like Carol, gave evidence at that case up in Lancashire with the eyesight one, because that's a field that I specialise in as well, was eyesight and vision. And really, there was one particular case that brought me to the attention. I had been dealing with a number of fatalities and serious injuries, either of older drivers or them causing the death of somebody. And this particular one caused me to make action as a result of it. And I thought I would BBC did a documentary about this, and I thought I would play you a short little video extract from the BBC. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this. If you can't hear it, then let me know.
My son Neil is a lovely young man. He's very conscientious, very, very close to his family, his brothers. And he had so many plans and hopes for the future.
March last year, and 28-year-old Neil Cahoon from Hampshire was with colleagues celebrating his first few weeks of a new job.
One of the girls, she wanted to go back to her car, and my son, being a gentleman that he was, I used to like to think he was a gentleman anyway, he escorted her back to her car. And he was going to go back to where the others were, and then he thought better of it. So he texted his flatmate and said, put the pizza on, get the beers out. He said, I'm coming home now.
But Neil was never to make it home. His route back took him along the A30 dual carriageway. During the journey, Neil safely overtook a BMW. All of a sudden, he was confronted by a car travelling the wrong way down the carriageway. The two cars smashed together in a head-on collision.
I was banging on my bedroom door, and I woke up, and it's my son saying, there's a policeman downstairs to speak with you. He said, I'm afraid there's been an accident.
It's pretty much head-on. Neil's vehicle span round, collided with the car that he was overtaking as well, and then the three cars have ended up in a sort of heap in the side of the road. His vehicle caught fire shortly after the collision, and many witnesses and people who have turned up to the accident afterward did their best in an attempt to get Neil out of the vehicle. It would have been an absolutely traumatic scene to come across. There were flames, there was smoke.
The driver of the other vehicle was 89-year-old Dr. Turner Waddell. Badly injured, he and his wife were pulled away from their vehicle, but Neil remained trapped in his car.
And of course the fire, the car caught light. And there was nothing left to identify my son. All that they could offer me was his burnt mobile, which was just melted plastic. You put on the face of people. You laugh and you joke. But inside, you're just breaking up.
The tragic part of this crash was that it could have been completely avoided, as Waddell was not fit to drive.
On the day of the collision and subsequent investigations, we found that in fact he had no sight in one eye and below the legal limit in the other. Therefore, he could hardly see where he was going when he was driving along the road.
So really, that brought about me to start and write a research document about older drivers, because we were seeing in Hampshire, where I was based, an increasing number of collisions and fatalities, and we wanted to look and see if there was something that we could do. And as a result of that, I came up with a sort of three-pronged approach of what we could actually do, which we trialled in Hampshire and now is a national idea. First was raising awareness to people about the risks they might face as they age, but also what they can do to reduce those risks. The second was encouraging people to think about voluntary driving assessments, to brush up on their skills and encourage a regular eyesight test, because we know, as Carol's very well put, it's an incentive and an important thing that we must all do to make sure that we're safe on the road. And then there's also, we know that there will be those who ignore that advice, think they're perfectly safe drivers, become what I say complacent. And unfortunately, they often come to the attention of the police by a careless driving offence. And so therefore, we created a purpose-built referral scheme for particular vulnerable road users to look at that. So firstly, let's look at that first prong, raising awareness. So I thought, well, what can we do about it? So I set up an organisation called the Older Drivers Forum, which I chair now. Carol sits with me and works with me with this, with a number of other people. And we're basically about keeping older people on the road safely for longer. And this is our main focus on us. Really, we're providing practical and informative advice for driving safely. We inform older drivers about the risks they face, about what they can do about it. Help to identify when is the right time to retire from driving, because we all age differently. We have drivers in their 40s no longer fit to drive. We have drivers in their hundreds perfectly fit to drive. And it's about each one of us having that responsibility to make sure that we are fit. Like we MOT our cars, we need to make sure we MOT ourselves regularly, and particularly as we age even more so, to make sure that we are fully fit and our sight is good to drive. But also we give advice to family and friends and medical practitioners and optometrists, often because, exactly as shown is that inquest that Carol explained about, often GPs, optometrists don't have these conversations with people. And also, currently, they only have what we call a duty of care to inform the DVLA. It actually, responsibility for medical practitioners and optometrists rests solely with the individual. They are the legal responsibility to do that. It's something that we'd like to change, and something that certainly we put forward in the consultations. But also family and friends, about how to have those difficult conversations. And we'll be talking a little bit about that in a second. Now, how can we raise awareness? Well, I decided, I had a look, and particularly since COVID, we've seen a massive increase in older people utilising the internet quite regularly. So we created a website called olderdriversforum.com. Now on there, we want it to be a one-stop shop where people can come for help, advice, and be sent to the right places for where they need. So we talk about license renewal and the law. We've got even bits about people who've applied for a license and still can they drive once they've applied, once the expiry dates come. We talk about different vehicles that they might lose with their grandfather rights, like vans and minibuses. And we also talk about assessments and appraisals and show what's available in their area. We talk about eyesight, medical conditions. We even have a cost calculator on there where you can put in how much it costs you to run your vehicle and compare that maybe to running a taxi and taking taxi. We also have various driving tips, from winter driving tips, all these different things that we have on there as well. We also run regular webinars and awareness events, all which are recorded and you'll find them on our website under the events tab. We also have lots of videos about turning right at junctions, which is a big issue for older drivers. We also have driving at night and how to combat that problem of glare. And so there's a whole raft of videos. There's also more documentary videos for the longer version of the one involving Patricia there, who was talking on the video. But we also do a lot of TV and radio to try and promote the importance of not being complacent. And actually, myself and Carol and a colleague are currently working at designing a new website. So the website is a bit antiquated if you have a visit of it. And what we have done, we've already done a funding where Carol carried out an analysis of the current website. And that's really given us a good framework of what the future should look like. And then from that, we will be now in the process, we've just got funding, of designing a brand new website. And we hope by 2027, we'll be able to launch the best global website for mature and older drivers. And that's our aim, really. So, you know, we're really keen to get lots of information and put it out there. And we've got lots to work on and lots of knowledge and expertise, hopefully, to put into that. So the second part of raising awareness we looked at in our second prom was actually voluntary driving appraisals and assessments. So there's not really one that fits everybody. There's actually two options. Now, first is what we would call our confidence building appraisal or assessment. Now, these are usually done in the person's own vehicle. They're quite often confidential, and they're run from the person's home address. And I know, for example, IEM RoadSmart run a mature driver's review. There's the Blue Lamp Trust driver training are currently about to launch a new scheme, and there's also very much local council led ones as well. So there's quite a lot of options. Basically, anybody in the whole of the UK can actually find one in their area, and we put links to people to help that. Now, that's for people for confidence building. But if someone has a medical condition that may affect their ability to drive, then we would not recommend those confidence building assessments. In fact, we recommend that people should be signposted to local driving mobility centres. Now, there's 21 centres that cover the whole of the UK. Each one has outreach centres, and nobody has to travel more than 30 minutes or 30 miles to find or go to one. Now, these are DVLA accredited. They're the only organisation by the DVLA to carry out what we call clinical assessments of people's driving, and they use approved driving instructors. They use occupational therapists and medical practitioners. They use assessment involving cognitive, so they assess someone's ability to move, and cognitive skill testing depending on their needs. They look at their driving, and they use centre vehicles which are either adapted or non-adapted, or they also have manuals, automatic, small ones, and allow people to acclimatise to those vehicles. And they have to be those type of vehicles because they're dual controlled. But also they give advice about mobility aids. So if someone has a weakness, then they can offer putting a ball on their steering wheel, bigger mirrors, and even to full adaptions if someone's lost a leg, or we've even got people through mobility who are driving using a straw through their mouth and they've got no arms or legs. It's amazing what they can do to help and support people. But like I said, those are the two options. So if someone's, for example, got dementia, we would not recommend them doing a confidence building one, but we would recommend going to the experts who can assess to see if that dementia has got to a point whether it's safe or unsafe. So this really brought us about, because I sit on the National Older Drivers Task Force, we looked that there are many good schemes across the country, but that equally there are people who are doing assessments on people who really don't have the training to assess them, but also maybe stepping outside their boundaries. And therefore, a lot of insurance industries are not willing to give discounted insurance because there's no real accredited, scheme. So what we decided to do, myself, Carol, and a few others from a working group, decided to make a mature driver assessment. And we've looked, and we set over an 18-month period. We set with experts of academics and current providers, and we came up with a framework of what a mature driver assessment should involve. And we actually came up with what an application would involve. We looked at what the report would involve, and a marking scheme from from red, amber, green, and we gave reasons behind that, an assessor's guide to explain how that is. We also created micro sessions on vision and hazard awareness. So when they do have a little break on the drive out, they actually can talk about, what's the vision, what's your hazard perceptions like, and various different things like that. So we're utilising that. So we're currently going through this in 5 different areas across the country with funding from the Road Safety Trust. And we're basically we're doing 50 people in each area. And we're assessing utilising different providers. In fact, two of the providers are actually from IAM RoadSmart, which is great. In Warwickshire and Gloucestershire, we're trialling with those. This is going exceptionally well. We've had a massive uptake, and exactly as Carol was saying, we're actually getting people to do an online assessment to start with, which involves hazard perception. We then do some assessment after the appraisal that they've gone out with an approved driving instructor, and then we reassess them a little while afterwards to see what their thoughts are and feedback. And we've also then looked at the driving instructors and the organisations, and we're producing a report which we hope to be out in the latter part of this year with sort of explaining what the way how success this is. And this is really a standardized confidence building one. This is to replace number one, to have a national standard, because the medical one has been very much analysed nationally, but all these different ones haven't. Now, one really important thing is that we want the people who are doing this training to be specially trained, to be able to assess. So we only use ADIs, and we're only asking ADIs who've undertaken a special course by Road Safety GB called the Aging Driving Course, which a lot of research and work has gone into. And this course actually costs £99 plus VAT, and it's for ADIs, and it involves these various different things. It's looking at eyesight, hazard perception, the understanding of the needs of older drivers and mature drivers, how to prepare for retirement, different medical conditions, so they're aware that actually maybe when is the right time to say, actually this isn't us who should be doing this, we're going to signpost you over to actually the mobility centre, and to making sure that they're aware of their professional boundaries. But also the course is delivered over two 2.5 hour facility on-led Zoom calls, really, on meetings with a group of people. And then there's some e-learning modules as well. And then once a person's completed this, they go on a national database ADI list on the Road Safety GB, which is something we put on our Older Drivers Forum website as well. Now, the other thing, obviously, we're encouraging people to about eyesight. Really important they have a regular eyesight test. That's essential, we feel, to safe driving as well. So that's something we've been very much working with in this consultation and putting evidence there. But as Carol's already covered about eyesight, I won't go into that particular field. Now, the third prong that I talked about is for those who've stuck their head in the sand. And we come across many people. I've driven for many, many years. In fact, a lot of the research I've done with many through the task force, when we spoke to insurance providers, a lot of the high risk that they look at is ex-professional drivers, people who have done advanced driving tests, people who have, like the police, like myself, an advanced driver and a motorcyclist and a car driver. I was. But the thing is, unless you get regularly assessed, can you really say that you still are? And that's the problem. We have come across people who've said they've done an advanced test, and when we've asked them, well, that's 25 years ago. Yes, they've probably kept some of the skills, but without regular assessments, then they will lose those. And unfortunately, those people often for insurance industries become very high risk, and they sometimes put a lot of emphasis on that. So that's why standardized will help with this regular, which we'd recommend probably every 2 years, is a great way of just keeping general people's skills up. And then we also signposting people to yourselves, for example, IAM RoadSmart, to develop their driving, which I know. I mean, the other day I did a talk to quite a few IAM groups, and there was a person in their 90s who just passed their IAM advanced test with honours, which is fantastic, which just shows we all age differently. But like I said, the third prong, there will be those who stick their head in the sand, think they're perfectly safe, but unfortunately carry on driving. And this is where we created, in Hampshire we trialled it, we've now running it in 23 police forces across the country, and it's a thing called the Police Fitness to Drive Assessment. Now, you're going to be later listen to Professor Crondall, who actually created many of the national UK road courses on various different things from his psychological background. And I'm actually a trainer on those. And actually, they're very good courses. So, if you get caught for speeding, careless driving, various different courses, offences, you can be signposted to an alternative to prosecution. Now, those courses are excellent. They really are. But we found that for certain individuals, they weren't really picking up if there was a medical or cognitive issue that was causing behind it. So what we have done is created this police fitness to drive assessment. And this looks at for 3 different types of people. So anybody aged 70 and above, So that's the age when you renew your license. Anybody age 70 above who commits the offence of careless driving, then they would go on this police fitness to drive assessment instead of the safe driving course or what's driving you course. Or anybody of any age who drives a specially adapted vehicle. And the reason we do that is the assessors that we use are part of driving mobility, and they've got extra specialist skills to see if the adaptation that's fitted to that vehicle may no longer be fit for purpose, or they may need additional adaptations or actually removal of it. So it's about checking that that's suitable. But also anybody that the police might think that actually, do you know what? I think there might be something medically wrong with that person. So if they commit the offence of careless driving, doesn't have to be a collision for any of these, it's just a careless driving offence, then they would get referred to this police fitness drive assessment. Now, unlike a course where you pay your money and turn up, this actually is an assessment. It has 3 possible outcomes. The first is what we call a safe outcome, where we assess them cognitively, we assess them on their driving ability, so 2 different sections on it, and as a result of it we go, yeah, okay, I think you're okay, maybe a few little things to work on, but generally a safe driver. But then there's this unsafe outcome, where usually we find round about the vast majority of these people have a cognitive or medical condition that may be affecting their ability to drive. And when that happens, when we get an unsafe outcome, we send with the police a form to the DVLA, and we find that 88% of those subsequently have their licence revoked because they're no longer safe on the roads. But then we are identifying those who actually, do you know what? You're not cognitively, medically unfit to drive, but actually you're just a bad driver. You've picked up some very unsafe skills. So what we say to them is go away, get some driving lessons, and then they come back to us and we carry out a free review assessment of them again within 3 months. And what we find is about 50% produce a safe outcome. The other 50% still are unsafe outcome. So ultimately, our results show this. 30% are unsafe, but 70% are safe. Now, the scary thing is if we've got 23 police forces running this, we're trying to roll it out. We're working with UK Road at the moment to try and roll it out across the whole country, because what we are identifying, that 30%, if they potentially went on a safe considered driving course or what's driving you course, may very well end up still driving, because they've got a medical or cognitive issue which is being picked up, and we need to evidence it to the DVLA, and this assessment evidence it and allow the DVLA to take action. So it's a very successful scheme. Now, generally then, what could we all do to carry on driving safely for longer, particularly as we age? Well, we really say there's 4 sort of things that you can actually do to do that. Number 1 is make sure you don't become complacent, and you can do that by undertaking mature driver assessment. Having an eyesight test every 2 years, which involves a field of vision check. Really important that it involves that peripheral vision check. Also, check with your doctor that, am I safe to drive? Do I have one of the 183 notifiable medical conditions, which we know a huge number of people are underreporting notifiable medical conditions to the DVLA, either because they don't know they've got it, or they just failed to do it because it's a self-certification. So important for us is that we check with our doctor, do I have one that I need to tell? Quite often, most of those won't stop you driving, they just may put extra checks that the DVLA need to do. Also check with your pharmacist to make sure that any medication you're on isn't going to affect your driving as well. Because quite often we'll have one medication, they give us another medication, then we have side effects, which they give us another medication, and we know often we can't see our GPs, and what happens, we have this concoction of medication, and we end up rattling. And unfortunately, that can produce issues that we can't be safe. So it's always best to actually check with a pharmacist that, taking all these drugs, am I safe to drive? And by doing those things, hopefully people would be able to carry on driving safely for longer. But we do need to recognise there will be a time when we need to retire from driving. Now, we do give advice, like I said, to family and friends about, having those difficult conversations. And we've got a web page on our website about family and friends. And on there has some videos. We've got a webinar that we've recorded about how to do that, which basically covers these 3-stage approach. So firstly, you want to identify who in the family or friendship is the best person, who has the best relationship with that person would listen to and understand. Then when is the right time to have that conversation with the person? So rather than just jump out, Dad, I think you should stop driving, or I think you're a bad driver, actually trying to discuss with them. Said, look, we've seen this on TV. Did you see that little program that they did on road safety? What do you think about that? And have a conversation in a nice, comfortable, less stressful situation, with the idea that all of us need to plan. And then what? Have an idea of what you want that person to do. So maybe think, I saw this mature driver assessment out there. When did you last have your eyesight then? You know, or maybe you want to develop your driving. I am road smart at doing things, you know, all these different things. Or maybe your difficulty driving. Maybe you want that modification. Your ball on your steering wheel might help with you. And understanding that we all will have a time that we need to retire from driving. You know, we retire from work at a certain age. We retire from skiing when your knees pack up. There will be a time that we all have to retire from driving. So it's about having that three-staged approach we find works really well. Now, in the last sort of 5 minutes, I was going to say that I would just talk about the new road safety strategy and just give you a quick overview. This is bullet points of the main little points that are in the new road safety strategy. Many of them have got consultation requests, and they, just to let you know, all the consultations run out on the 11th of May that you've got a chance, and there's some key subjects that they're asking about. But mainly, the road safety strategy is about reducing death and serious injuries, and they want to do that by 65% for deaths by 2035, and for children under 16 by 70%. And we are seeing an unrecognised amount of people still dying on our roads every year, and actually that is an ambitious target. And with that, myself and Carol have had meetings with the DFT, and it is something that they are going to have to put some funding behind, because you will not be able to achieve that without looking at all aspects of all drivers, all ages. But then when we look at older drivers, as we were talking about, there's two real ones that they're looking at. Eyesight testing at the age of 70 and every 3 years thereafter. And if you go on my website, there's a poll that we've got where people can take part and give their feedback, which we're using as part of our consultation. So please feel free to take part in that. Also, talking about cognitive assessments, they are looking at ways about when we get to the age of 70 and we tick that box to say we haven't got any medical conditions, maybe there is some more cognitive testing that could be implemented. And they're looking at ways that maybe that should happen. Now, drink drive limit. They're looking at reducing the drink drive limit, okay, from 35 micrograms to 22 micrograms, which is a lot of people we talk about when we look across Europe, for example. We're one of the worst countries in Europe. We are the worst country in Europe for our drink drive regulations, which have been imposed since 1967. So absolutely very much outdated. And really, do we want to we're 0.08 at the moment, they say. Other countries, mainly in Europe, do 0.05. But shouldn't we really be thinking about 0.02? That means that there's just a little trace of alcohol, so you could, do your mouthwash, eat that cake, which has got something in it, and not be over the limit. But really, if we're looking at a future where we want to stop deaths on our roads, we should be really encouraging people not to drink and drive at all. And then supporting, new drivers. Now, like I said, we're very supportive of GDL. We think the government should have implemented that. However, they haven't, which is a shame. But maybe with all the work that's going in the background, that might change their mind. But in the meantime, they're looking at making a minimum learning period between 3 to 6 months from the time that you pass your theory test to the time that you actually do your actual full test. And they're looking at that being round about maybe 40 to 120 hours of maybe supervised driving, which could be with an ADI, could be with a parent. And that would be also having various additional training, things like nighttime driving, bad weather driving, maybe driving on the motorway, various different things like that. So they're looking about expanding that training that everybody must have in between doing your full test. But really, this is something we should be having in our whole driving career, is continue. And I do feel post-test, there should be more testing going on and more restrictions in those first 2 vulnerable years. Then looking at dangerous and illegal driving, they're looking at more harsher fines and penalties for uninsured drivers, maybe prison sentences, maybe looking at that. Drug driving, utilising the police to have more access to the ability to do the drug wipes, because it's a lot of funding that's required to do that. And we're seeing an increasing amount of drink and drug driving going on. Seatbelt wearing, round about 20 95% of people who die on our roads are not wearing seatbelts. Still shocking. And in fact, therefore, rather than a non-endorsable offence, they're looking at an endorsable offence, which could be for the driver who's responsible for everybody in the car. Also, ghost plates. We're seeing a lot of these plates on cars, which when they did the cameras with the AMPR, they're actually having a filter across it that they can't read. But there's some technology that's being utilised, and they're looking at rolling that out nationally as well. Also, looking at, ADAS, which is this, additional driving. I can't even remember the word for it, but it's all these extra things that we fitted to our vehicles, all the technology like collision avoidance, browser awareness, speed limiters, making sure that we at least fit in with what other European countries are doing and actually implement 18 different types is what they're looking at in implementing, and all new cars should have these in order to help reduce. Personally, some of them work, but it's about having them fitted to allow people to have the choice of what works for them and what doesn't. But with that, we'll require some education to let people understand how to use that. And it's something as a organisation we're thinking about. And then lastly, we're looking at motorcycles and mopeds. As a motorcyclist myself, it can now, by all this licensing system, it's very confusing for many people. So they're looking at a much more clearer system of progression through from CBT and development from that. Also ensuring that sort of the sharp helmet safety ratings are very much applied, because when we have that collision, we want to make sure we've got good helmets and make sure that people are safe on our roads as well. So what we want to do is reduce the crash likelihood, reduce the severity by not only looking at helmets, but also designing roads and warning signs to make it safer for motorcyclists, and also improving the system generally for the gig rider, the gig economy, those people who are using for delivery drivers are often high risk as well, making sure additional training and implementations by the employer are in place for that. Because unfortunately, 1% of road users, 1% of motorcyclists, or say 1% of road users are made up of motorcyclists and mopeds, but they account for 21% of all fatalities on our roads. So hugely disproportionate to any amount there. So that is something that the government very much are looking at. And that's it from me. There you go. So I shall stop share and be free for any questions.
Thank you, Rob. So I'd like to invite anybody to either raise their hand or pop a question in the chat box. We've got enough time for a couple of questions. So yeah, please. And thank you, Rob. That was a fantastic and informative presentation.
Oh, no one. That's good.
Well, Nick seems to have a question, and if anybody doesn't have enough time to ask a question to Rob now, there will be an opportunity at the end. But thank you, Nick.
Oh, just get everything switched on there. Rob, that was really interesting, and I know that we've worked together, our organisations, quite closely over the last few years. The one thing that still concerns me is the element of, I guess, denial, where people just feel that they are, great drivers, and as a driving organisation and a riding organisation ourselves, you often, before people start even an advanced course, they say, well, I'm a good driver, I don't need to do that, and then they suddenly realise that they're perhaps not as good as they thought they were. But I mean, do you find that from all of your work, do you find that it is a real issue with people when they get to their sort of late 60s, early 70s, that there is that element of denial, both from, I guess, a cognitive perspective, but also from a driving and riding standards perspective?
Yeah, because we're very much finding that the people we often engage with for mature driver assessments and things like that are those who predominantly pretty much safe themselves anyway. There are practical people wanting to make sure that they're safe on the road. They go out of their way to make sure they do a lot of the things we already recognise. And that's why we brought in that police fitness to drive assessment, because we recognise there are those who stick their head in the sand, think they're safe. And actually, as a former police officer, when I investigated as a senior investigating officer in fatalities, I'd quite often see that person had come to the attention of the police or attention drawn numerous times, and very little had been done. And actually, those were missed opportunities. And that's where I said, actually, we need to see if that person's cognitively medically fit to drive and assess them properly in relation to that, which is why that scheme worked in and has been so successful, been running for now over 12 years now. So it is a big problem. And that's why we're wanting to try and make it frame what we're doing in a supportive, caring way. So therefore, people know that actually it's a responsibility. One person might do it and say, did you hear about this? What do you think about? Why don't you do one of these? And therefore, try and make it a natural thing that all of us aren't complacent as we age and understand that a car is a lethal weapon and that we need to make sure that we're all safe to control that lethal weapon at any age. But particularly, we know as we age, medical and cognitive issues can be an issue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Nick. And David, I'm not sure if you're keen to present early or if you've got a question for Rob here. Over to you.
No, I've got a question for Rob. Thanks very much for that, Rob. Great talk. I'm particularly pleased to see at the end they talking about ADAS as well, because it's almost like we've chatted beforehand, because that's going to lead quite nicely into a subsection of my talk. I was wondering what you see as the barriers to ADAS use with amongst the older driver population.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big one at the moment, because quite often our older generation, we know often, will have some extra money from retirement and go out and buy a vehicle. And as we all know, if you've ever bought a car, they come along, there you are, congratulations, sir, here's the key, off you go. And you drive off down the road and it's just, well, where do I start? This thing's making bells, whistles at me. So what most people do, turn it all off. I mean, I just rented a car I go to Denmark regularly, and we hire a car from Copenhagen, and you come straight out of the hire company and you straight onto the motorway, and you've got no one to explain all of this tech that you've got on your car. And it takes me about half an hour to kind of look it up on the internet. So one of the things we have been thinking about, there are some organizations we're working with who are looking at training people on these, but also we're trying to encourage maybe that when you buy a car, you would come out of your garage, and your garage would tick a box here, tick a box, this is what you've got fitted, and then there'd be a little QR code next to each one of those. So you have a picture of your car, it's got speed assist, a speed limiter, it's got lane assist, or all these different technologies. You do a little QR code and it produces a little explanation about how this works, or maybe a link to a little short video about how to use it. But ideally, what we want manufacturers to do is actually, especially with the older generation, is take them out for an hour and say, look, let me show and demonstrate how this works. And I think if we had that from a very good car provider, many older people would say, you know what, I'm going to go to that, for example, Honda sell a huge number of cars for the older generation. Maybe if they started doing this, you can imagine a lot of people more likely to go to them because they're getting more support and understanding the car that they've just bought, rather than just there's the keys and off you go.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. Well, thank you, Rob, for an incredibly informative presentation. You've got some requests for your slides already in the chat, so I'm sure we'll be able to go back to the gentleman who's asked. At this point, we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break. So I make it 11:22, so we'll resume at 11:32. So if anybody wants to make a cup of tea, pop to the loo, then now is the time. And during the break, I'll be putting a couple of poll questions into the chat. So you're invited to respond to the polls, and it should give us a bit of an insight into the thoughts on the webinar today. Okay, thank you. See you in 10. Okay, well, I make that just coming up to 11:33. Welcome back, everyone. I've seen a couple of people in the chat having problems with the poll. If you'd like to join in, then by all means, if you can see the poll, just type in your answer. That'll be the best way of going about it. But looking at the stats here, the question was, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing older drivers today? And the most popular answer appears to be eyesight and health with 46%, then road and vehicle complexity with 26%, confidence and skills has got 13%, lack of awareness and support 13%. So clearly Carol's presentation earlier was very convincing, and eyesight and health is the number one concern. Thank you everyone for rejoining us again. Now I am glad to be able to introduce our final speaker, Dr. David Crandall. Dr. David Crandall was Professor of Psychology at Nottingham Trent University, specialising in traffic and transport psychology, and who also works with UK ROED to develop NDORS courses. He's also the co-founder of EC2 Solutions, a spin-out company developing hazard perception assessment and training tools for commercial fleets. He has published over 100 academic papers and book chapters in the field, and has received research of over £5 million from the Department of Transport, the DVSA, EPSRC, ESRC, the Road Safety Trust, the RAC Foundation, and many commercial clients. David, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Right, let's click on this Present in Teams button and see if that works.
All good.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for the invite and the opportunity to chat. Yes, I'm a professor of traffic and transport psychology, so I've been in this field since the mid-90s, when I actually started my PhD on young drivers, and specifically in terms of their driving skills and hazard perception. I'm also, as William mentioned, co-founder of EC2 Solutions. It's not a name which is easy to pronounce when you first look at it. We thought it was a great idea when we had 20 minutes in an Innovate UK workshop to come up with it, but we're stuck with it now. The idea behind it is actually we're big fans of in situ training. We think training in the real world is by far the best, but sometimes we acknowledge that actually it can be very difficult, expensive, or just hazardous, dangerous to actually train in situ, and certainly for things like hazard perception, which is why we are e-situ. So we use electronic and virtual scenarios to help train people, and hazard perception is the big thing that we do as a company. We have hazard perception tests for all sorts of vehicles, from HGVs through to tractors, through to ambulances, fire appliances, and now we've moved into, over the last few years, VR as well. So we give you 360-degree hazard perception tests. And more often than not, when I'm doing a talk like this, I would be talking about hazard perception. And it's great to hear that both Rob and Carol were talking about it too. But for once, I'm going to be talking about something different. I'm going to be talking about young drivers more in general, the training problem that we might have. Right, let's see whether this works. Oh, that's looking good. Right, so these are some numbers I cribbed from a government spreadsheet a couple of years back. 1 in 2 new drivers pass their test on the first attempt. However, we know from studies quite a while ago that the retest reliability of the driving test isn't great. So back, I think it was in the cohort 2 data, there was a study where young drivers were offered a buy one, get one free driving test, and the only catch was they had to do both driving tests until they found out whether they passed one of them. They only needed to pass one. And the idea was, if somebody was good enough to pass that first test, they should be good enough to pass that second test. That's what we call retest reliability. Unfortunately, that reliability wasn't really there, which suggests that to a certain extent, there's a bit of luck involved in terms of the scenarios that you end up in when driving in that on-road test. Of course, the other problem is that 1 in 5 drivers crash within a year of passing that test, and we know that young drivers are grossly overrepresented in the crash statistics. And in part, certainly once they get past that first year, attitudes, sort of illusory superiority, optimism bias, those all play a role. But we also know that undeveloped skills, or underdeveloped skills rather, are also really, really pertinent for these young novice drivers. Now, what can we do about it? Well, there's many potential opportunities to step in and reduce that crash risk. Graduated driver licensing is something that the road safety field have been pushing for quite a while, but the government really hasn't got behind it. I mean, I know things are going on in Northern Ireland at the moment, but we've had the opportunity to bring in GDL for quite a while, and it just doesn't seem to be going very far. In fact, I think that the government really preferred the idea of leaving it all to telematics, the idea that insurers could drive road safety through telematic boxes, and that companies could also drive safety within their fleets through telematics. And of course, telematics do provide some great data, but those data are only really as good as what we then do with those data. If we sit on the data, if we don't interrogate the data, if we can't understand the data because the data is provided in the absence of, let's say, video, as it is in some cases, then those data really aren't going to help us in the way they could. And at the end of the day, they're still identifying primarily problems once they've occurred, rather than people using those data to predict which drivers are going to be involved in collisions in the future. And one of the things that we're left with then is the potential for further training. As psychologists, certainly that's something that we do support. And what I'm going to talk about today is the possibility of further training, what we call post-license training, on the basis that our young drivers might not have all of the skills that they need, even after they've passed their test. Is there scope for post-license training to pick up the slack? So, as I mentioned, as psychologists, we support training because that's one of the things that we can do. We can advise on that. We know the evidence. We understand how to evoke behaviour change through courses. Certainly, it would be a lot easier to do pre-license training to improve that. And we know that pre-license training is inadequate in many areas. So for instance, we've got the big consultation, as Rob was talking about, on motorcycle training. Well, there's quite an argument at the moment about why motorcyclists don't need to do something like a theory test or a hazard perception test prior to their CBT or as part of the CBT. I mean, if you think about it, we don't let drivers drive unsupervised without a theory test and a hazard perception test. We don't even let them take the on-road test without a hazard perception test. Yet we let motorcyclists on the road without any of that, just with that L plate, as if that's the magical thing that will protect them and keep them safe. So we perhaps do need some additional rules there, but that's really down to policy change. That's not something as psychologists we can have direct influence. We can contribute to the consultations, we can show them the evidence, and some of the evidence we've got our motorcycle hazard perception test, and we've been working with national trainers to try and get it out there. But the problem is, if you give it or offer it to young people doing CBT as something that they don't have to do, but it will make them safer, how many of them do it? Very few, and that's the problem. So is post-license training the answer? Well, it's certainly one of the things that we as psychologists can, as I say, get involved in. And one of the projects that we were involved in was a course called Road Ready that was being run by the South Yorkshire Safer Roads Partnership. And this is going back 4 or 5 years or so now, when we first asked to be involved. And we were brought in as evaluators, somebody who's going to evaluate the course to see whether the training had improved the skills of these young drivers. So we set out to do that evaluation. We started collecting our control group of data. And by the time we collected the first 100 people of control data, we wanted to see how, or we were looking at the numbers that were coming through from the trained group. And at that point, we'd had maybe 4 people that had been trained. So 4 people in the experimental group, over 100 people by that point in the control group. And we realized that this wasn't going to work. No matter what they were doing, and if you read the advert that they've got there, it's, there's lots of good things in that advert that should attract people to this course. They were talking about high risk. They're talking about how they can lower that risk. They're talking about how this course is free. They're even offering a prize, and that prize was go-karting sessions or shopping vouchers if you go along and do that training. But even with all of that involved, they couldn't make the young drivers of South Yorkshire want to get on board with that training course. So we pivoted the research at that point, and we thought, why? Why aren't they getting engaged with this course? So we put this out as an online survey. The advantage of doing it online is we're no longer geographically limited to South Yorkshire. We're putting it out as a hypothetical course and asking people whether they would be interested, if that course were to run in their region, whether they would be interested in doing it. So that's the first study I just want to talk about briefly. The first thing that we asked them was, where's my mouse gone? There it is let's find out a little something about the people who were responding to this survey. How good a driver do you think you are? We all know that people tend to think they're above average. And again, we've got the vast majority of respondents here agreeing somewhat or strongly that they are good drivers. And by far, the majority of them also think they are safe drivers as well. There is some people who think they are fast drivers too. So some people are acknowledging, you've got just under 200 people saying they are somewhat fast drivers, and about 40 people strongly agreeing that they are fast drivers. So people will acknowledge this. When we look for the relationships between these factors, though, we've done some correlations just to see what the basic relationships are. And there's a positive correlation between people who think they're safe and people who think they're good. The safer you are, the better a driver you think you are. However, there's also a positive correlation between people who think they're fast and people who think they're good drivers. So the faster the driver you are, the better the driver you are. And when we do a partial correlation between safe and fast, controlling for their ratings of how good a driver they are, we find this negative relationship. So there is a relationship there where people who are saying that they are fast drivers are not saying that they are safe drivers. So this is a problem because our fast drivers think they are good drivers, but they're not necessarily thinking they're safe drivers. How can we sell a course to people, or sell a course, because in this case it was free, to young drivers when they think A, they're good already, and B, they're not actually worried about being safe because they already think they're good. And for some reason, that supplants the need to be safe. So we asked them, how likely would you be to take this course? And we gave them that advert. We took away all of the local bits. It wasn't going to be in South Yorkshire. It was just a generic training course that we're going to do. But essentially, the flyer remained the same. And one of the studies that we could compare back to was a study by Neil Kinnear for TRL about 15 years ago. And they put forward a hypothetical course and found that 88% of people would be willing to do it in the future. Well, when we asked our drivers, it turned out that if we asked them, would you do this course at the moment? Only 32% in that middle bar, the 2 shades of bluey green, were somewhat or extremely likely to do the course. So that's less than a third, a huge difference to the findings of Neil Kinnear's study. But of course, he was asking them, would they do the course in the future? Now, there's something called construal level theory that argues that when we encode for events that are temporally separated from now, i.e. in the future, then we tend to encode them more abstractly. Now, that probably means that the salient benefits of the course, because they're written in that handout, are really quite apparent. But because we're encoding future events abstractly, the negative downsides of doing the course, i.e. you don't really know what you're going to be doing 6 months in the future, so they're encoded more abstractly. So the positives outweigh the the positives outweigh the negatives. That should mean that in the future, if you're asking, would you do the course in the future, you will get more people agreeing to it than if you ask, will you do the course now? Because right now, all of those barriers to doing it are really more salient in your mind. Construal level theory should also argue that this should work in the opposite direction as well, that if we ask people whether they would have done it in the past, and in this case, we're asking before the pandemic, because the data were collected just after COVID, then we should get greater saliency for the benefits and lower saliency for the costs as well. And that's exactly what we found. So only a third of the people wanted to do it now, but in the past, 42% would have done it. In the future, 48% would do it. Not quite anywhere near the levels that Neil was getting in his TRL study, but it clearly shows that we've got to be careful about the questions we ask. If you're asking, will you do this course in the future? That's not a guarantee by any means that that number of people will actually do that course when they get to that point in the future. So why not? Why do they not want to do this course? Well, we gave them a whole load of reasons and we asked them to rate again how strongly they agree or disagree with those reasons. And you can see the top one there is, I'm too busy. I'm just too busy to do the course right now. There's too much going on. So we put all of these ratings into a proportional odds logistic regression, trying to predict whether or not they would do the training right at this moment on the basis of their scores on that question you've seen in the previous slide. Which of these options significantly contributed to that model to predict their willingness to take part? Here they are. Oh, let me click on that. So the ones that I've highlighted are the ones that statistically contribute to the model. So I am too busy, that's what they all agreed with, but actually that doesn't statistically contribute to this behavioral model. The one that does contribute is actually, it's not that I'm too busy, I'd just rather do something else with my time. Also, I don't feel I need additional training. We hear that a lot. We know that optimism, bias, illusory superiority means that these drivers, they've passed their test. They don't think they need additional training. And that comes in down here as well at the bottom. Driving lessons are for learner drivers only. They also don't know whether the course is any good. And of course, we've got a COVID specific problem there as well. Now, there is something in green there called, if it's free, what's the catch? And that's an interesting one, because the green nature of it means that this is positively related to whether they said they'd do the course. So they're saying, I'll do the course, but I'm worried that there's a catch. That doesn't make much sense. But actually, when you think about the way we ask the questions, it perhaps makes a little more sense. So we gave them the question, would you do this course right now? First, and showed them the advert. And then we asked them, are you worried about it being free? Is there a catch to it? Is that something that's concerned you? I think what's happened here is all of those people have done have looked at that flyer. Some of them said, yeah, I do that now. And then we asked them, do you think there's a catch because it's free? And they go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I've been a right muggins. I've said I'm going to do this course and I didn't realize that it was going to be free or that why it might be free. And of course, in this age of data phishing, of scamming, this is a concern, but it's probably more of a concern for those people who feel when they've been asked that question after saying they would do the training, that they may have been caught out. Right. Next. So we know that only a third of them want to do the training. We know that there are some very strong reasons why they don't want to do the training, primarily because they've got other stuff to do. Even though it's free, there is a social cost for them. They're going along to training, they're giving up the time to be spent in the pub with their mates or out with friends, etc., etc. And that is still a cost to them. Is there anything that they did want training in? That's what we asked them next. Now, this question was asked back in 2008 with the cohort 2 study, and the green bars show what people were thinking about in the cohort 2 study nearly 20 years ago. The red bars show the frequency of people saying that they would like training in this right now. So you can see that the pattern is actually quite similar. Driving on snow or ice was the most popular 20 odd years ago, and it's the most popular one today. That's what they really want training in. Thick fog, parking, heavy rain. So there's a lot of things here which are weather based. Understandably so. They can't get trained in weather-based driving on real roads because the driving instructors never know when it's going to be necessarily pouring down with rain or thick fog, and people don't want to necessarily have lessons late at night. So there are issues there with driving in the dark and driving under those weather conditions. But unfortunately for us, things like hazards, spotting hazards, that comes quite far down in their list of needs, even though we know that hazard training is something actually that they do need. Now, we also included a number of other options when we were asking those questions. So now this is just their responses to our questions. We forget the cohort 2 data. The 6 ones that we put in were things like driving electrical vehicles or electric vehicles and using ADAS. And those 2 ones came right near the top, up with vehicle safety checks as well. So there are things that they want. Yes, indeed. They're driving in bad weather. We've seen that, but also with new vehicles, technology is something where they actually want training as well. So the conclusion so far, 85% of our samples said they were good drivers. How are we going to give away training to these drivers if they think that they're good? And less than a third of them were willing to engage with free driving, even with prizes. Many of them said they were too busy, but that's not what they meant. What they meant is, actually, I'd rather do something else. I don't need training. But there is something here in the technology related training that is interesting because, yes, it's hard to train people at night in bad weather because it's dependent on when you can actually train them. But the technology related requirements, the training that they want for that, now this is a bit more interesting because that is something that we can do as ADIs, as putting on training intervention courses. In other words, what I'm thinking is, and this goes back to my experience of trying to feed one of my huskies his worming tablet every so often. Very difficult to get him to open his mouth. So what we do is we stick it in a bit of cheese. It's basically sugar coating the pill. If they want training in ADAS, let's advertise training in ADAS, but then at the same time, let's infiltrate that training with safety related knowledge. One of the things that we get back from when we ask people about ADAS is things like, I don't like ADAS because when I try to overtake someone, it tries to pull me back in my lane if I'm trying to overtake a cyclist, for instance. Well, actually, they need to know, they need to be trained that if you put your indicator on for the vast majority of lane control systems, it will automatically shut off lane control to allow you to move out of the lane, overtake, and then pull back in. So we're giving them training and safety messages at the same as in training in ADAS. Now, this was great for us because we had another study that ran pretty soon after this, and it was all about young drivers and ADAS. And the first thing we asked them, and this was done with a driver training company that you might recognize in this video, but the first thing that we asked a group of them is, what does ADAS stand for? I should pause it here and just ask, are you getting the volume on that? Are you getting the audio?
Yep, that's all coming through.
Excellent. So a rather poor showing from our young, technologically savvy students, who, all of them drivers, by the way, but did not really have a great grip on what ADAS was. In fact, again, it was less than a third who got that right. So we went out to another study with 1,000 drivers this time, and we just asked them which systems have they heard of, and there is great variety here. The ones that have been with us for the longest, like reversing and parking sensors, obviously most people have understand what those systems are and have heard of them. Cruise control, there's another one that we all know of. But down at the other end, things like driver monitoring systems, intelligent speed adaptation, those are the things that they've not heard of. So which systems do they use? Well, the pattern changes dramatically now. Parking sensors is really the only thing that they use. Maybe some of them, a small percentage, are using cruise control, but the vast majority of these drivers are not using any forms of ADAS. Why is that the case? Well, they just don't use ADAS because, well, in some cases, the car is too old. That's quite obvious. The opportunity to use ADAS is a real restriction for them. But if we move beyond that and ask, what are the other reasons that might stop you using ADAS? We can see a couple of important clusters. First of all, here we've got, I like control. I don't want to be over-reliant on ADAS. I'm worried about skill fade. And a lot of these younger drivers here are already worried about skill fade with ADAS. Well, there are some issues that ADAS could involve or could lead to some things like skill fade, but we need to be able to better explain those situations to them and actually how ADAS can support them in a way that won't necessarily lead to problems like over-reliance. So there's very clear ways in which we can promote the safety aspects of ADAS while dispelling the majority of concerns to those drivers. Another clutch of suggestions here or problems is they don't know. They don't know enough to use it safely. They don't even know what ADAS they have, as Rob was saying, and they don't even know how to turn it on if they do know that they've got it. But that's a simpler issue for us because, again, that is something that we can instruct. There are problems in how we go about instructing, of course, because there's no real opportunity for these young drivers to try ADAS without consequences. So the ideal thing would be that they can just try it out themselves, in situ training for themselves in that sense. But there isn't really that opportunity. You can't try out or adaptive cruise control while you're sat on the driveway. You've got to turn it on while you're driving at speed on a road and there's a car ahead of you, potentially. That's the point when you need to turn it on. If you've never turned on ADAS before and you don't exactly know what it's going to do, you don't know what the side effects or the little foibles of your system is going to be, then that can be a very nerve-wracking thing. But we can train them, and there is lots of training opportunities out there already, but a lot of the young drivers don't know about those training opportunities. If they do know about anything, it's probably someone they follow on TikTok, and those training resources might not be of the best quality and might be misleading in some senses. And of course, we've got the problem that they don't necessarily have the motivation to find out more about ADAS to make themselves safer, because in some ways, some of them think that they are already quite safe. So what might persuade them to use ADAS more? Well, classics, the classic thing is going to be money. Fuel efficiency up here is the biggest one that would make them think that ADAS is worth using. So not safety per se. Discounted insurance again is up there, and the opportunity to use it through having a newer car. But the evidence that it makes you safer is a lowly fourth in the list there in terms of them agreeing that that would be relevant. And when we start looking at what sort of training might help them, here's all the different aspects of training. Well, they're not terribly impressed with the idea of classroom training. So the indoors approach might not be brilliant for us, certainly in the classroom, but online training does come out at the top. Now, we didn't actually specify whether we were talking about online e-learning or online in a sort of like online classroom setting like we have in indoors, but certainly the idea of doing it from your own room is or your own house is by far and away the best. And then simulator training. Now this is really interesting because there was a project, a European project called Pascal, that was led by an Italian group that was designing a simulator that people could practice using different forms of ADAS on. But that doesn't seem to have gone much further. And since that project has finished, the project website has been discontinued. So we've got no real way. If anyone does know how Project Pascal has gone on beyond the project, I would love to hear from you. But I still think a simulator, an easy to use simulator, would be absolutely brilliant for people to have a go at, especially if it's from the comfort of their own home. But in the absence of that, online training and access to important informational sources, I think, is quite crucial. And one of the things we've done, like others before us, is we've created a whole suite of driver training guides to using different forms of ADAS with one of the instructors from our partner in that particular research project. So, overall conclusions. Young people just don't want general safety training, and that's really unfortunate because we know they need it. Technology training, however, is one of the exceptions, along with bad weather. And technology training is perhaps easier for us to put in. The problem is at the moment their ADAS knowledge is poor and their use of ADAS is poor. That's why they want the training, and this is where we can step in. We've got to explain the benefits to them because some people still won't be interested in ADAS. If we explain the benefits to them, we can bring them over to the side of wanting to be trained, and then we must instruct them in how to use it safely. That's what the young drivers who are saying they want ADAS training really want. And online training provision might be the most successful rather than taking them out or certainly giving them in a classroom. But it may also be a gateway to them actually taking a lesson with an ADI, which helps them learn about their ADAS systems. And finally, again, sugarcoating the training pill, I think, is super important. If we can disguise safety training, not in a Machiavellian way, we're not trying to manipulate people to our own ends, we're trying to train them up so they're safer on the roads and they have fewer collisions, fewer deaths. But a lot of ADAS is completely wrapped up in the idea of driving safety. And if when somebody tries their adaptive cruise control and they say, my goodness, that's slowing me down so far away from that vehicle in front, we could say, well, actually, that's a safe headway to be keeping. You're not keeping those safe headways when you drive. That's why it's surprising to you, not because this system is over safe. I think we've got an in to train these young drivers in greater safety, as well as preparing them for use of things like ADAS in the future. So I will finish there. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I've not gone terribly over time, and happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, David. That was an incredibly informative presentation. I've certainly learned a thing or two about ADAS systems. So thank you very much. We'll now like to open with a couple of questions. We'll just have a couple because I'm aware of the time, and then we'll move into our panel session. So, Nick Fletch, just need to unmute Nick. Oh, I think I can do it for you. Oh, no. Yeah, if you could just unmute Nick, then you'll be able to ask your question. So still on mute. I might go to Alison. Alison, would you like to ask David a question, and then Nick, we can come back to you, or you could type your question to the chat box. Alison.
Okay, hi. I just wonder if I misheard you, misunderstood you. Did you say that the hazard perception bit of the test is not compulsory before bikers do the CBT? I thought it was.
No, the hazard perception test is with the full license. So there's no requirement on riders to engage in hazard perception for the CBT level.
Okay, I was just trying to remember when I did it. Obviously, I was a driver first. So I do remember having to go and do it because it didn't exist when I did my test. But I felt it was before I started, but maybe you're right. Okay, I misunderstood then. So it is before you go into do your full license. That's fine. Thank you thanks for it.
The other problem as well is they end up sitting the same hazard perception test that learner drivers do. And we know that the hazards that motorcyclists face are very different to the hazards that car drivers face. So even when they do sit the hazard perception test, it's not as relevant to them as it could be.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Alison. Nick, have you been able to unmute yourself? Still not great. Nick's just put Nicholas Lees rather has just put a suggestion to type your question into the chat, and then we'll be able to ask David. Graham, see your hands raised. Got time for one more, then we'll move on to the panel discussion. Thank you, Graham.
Yes, one for David. Well, one's a comment and one's a question. So first of all, the comment. It's 1 point extrapolation on my behalf, but I've had a young driver come through the IAM process where his mother bought him the advanced driving, and one thing that crept in was the cost of the fuel to him, and also near the end of the training we were knocking up against his limit for insurance. So I think there's a few things mainly associated with cost that's putting the young drivers off. So I think to offer some training to them, we'd have to come up with some scheme that either gives them some free petrol, or we use somebody else's insured car or something. So that's a comment. The question for Dave, mainly on the sort of psychology of driving, I must say personally, I do find a lot of the modern cars with the touch screens, and especially the ones with the deep menus, very, very distracting. And at times you can nearly sort of run off the road or up the dike. And especially if they don't have a sort of quick reset or a reverse button to get you out of a deep menu that you've got into. Well, I'm just wondering whether there's anything on the man-machine interface in order to improve driver safety. Thank you.
Yes, there's lots of research being done on that, and lots of research that has been done. And we've known for years and years that button-free interfaces are terrible. Yet they've been driven by there may be some of my personal prejudices coming in here, but they've been driven by high-tech focused automotive engineers who want to provide something that looks flashy, that may arguably be there to make up for the lack of engineering sophistication that goes into the car itself. But we know that actually having physical buttons on the screen, physical buttons that you can actually interact with rather than buttons that change according to the context, is a lot safer. It provides that tactile feedback. It provides consistent mapping. So eventually, when you reach out for your volume knob, you're not really looking at it intently to land your hand on the volume knob, because you've learned exactly where it is, and you move over and you feel it, and you've got access to it. But when you're dealing with a screen where the buttons change according to what menu you're in, it attracts a lot more attention, and there is a great deal of greater confusion, a great deal of attraction going to that, taking the eyes off the road. So I think everyone knows that these interfaces are more dangerous, and it's about time we were really pushing back on these hugely flashy interfaces, which are undoubtedly making roads less safe.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you on that point, David. And no, thank you everyone for your questions.